This video is the first video in a series describing how to build a lexicon and grammar for English. And before you watch this video series, you should watch another series that we call Generator Tutorials. In that series, we talked about all the different types of grammar rules and the rules in the lexicon, how to enter new words into your lexicon. So that series describes how to use TBTA in general. And I'm assuming you've already watched that series before you watch this series. This series, we're going to build a new lexicon and grammar for English. And the first step is to come here, Utilities, select Add a New Language. We're going to add a new target language. We're going to call it English Demo. We already have a project called English, so we can't have another one. So we'll call this one English Demo. And TBTA is copying many rules from the library. It's building the theta grid adjustment rules. It's initializing various rules in the grammar. Now we need to select a font. And I recommend choosing a font other than Arial. When TBTA writes text, for example, in the comments for your rules, it will always use the Arial font. So I recommend something other than Arial. I like that one. By the way, the script down here, TBTA isn't aware of this. If you're using an alphabet based on the Cyrillic script, this doesn't apply. So we'll choose a font. And we're asked, does your language have an alphabet? We'll say yes. Do you want the Latin alphabet entered so that you can edit it for your language? We'll say yes. So we see the alphabet, and here are the phonetic features that we have defined in our library. And if you want them copied into your project, all you have to do is check the box. For English, it's very helpful to have the type, consonant, vowel, semi-vowel. As I mentioned in that other series, you only use phonetic features when you're writing morphophonemic rules. And in the morphophonemic rules, you always have a choice of specifying your environment using alphabetical characters or phonetic features. So you don't have to have phonetic features in your project. If you describe all of your environments in the morphophonemic rules with alphabetical characters, then you don't need phonetic features. But for English, it's useful to have this feature, the type. Whatever language you're working in, if these other phonetic features are useful to you, go ahead and activate them. And by the way, if you don't activate them now, you can always add them later. And you can add your own features and your own feature values. Anything you do during the initialization process can always be changed later. So we'll select that one and say OK. And here's our alphabet with the numerals. We'll say OK. So now we have a new language project. The next step is to initialize common features. These are very common tasks that just help you get started. Before we do this, I'd like to show you some things over here. So we're in a brand new language project. Right now, there are no rules in the common transfer rules copied from the library. If we look here in feature adjustment rules, for now number, singular, dual, trial, quadrill, pocket, and plural. In a minute, we're going to answer some questions that will collapse these values. For verb time, we have all of these features. And in a minute, when we do that initialization process, all of these will be collapsed to past, present, and future. If we look down here, for clauses, soon we're going to add features that are here right now. This is in a brand new project, so we have spares down here up through spares 15. So now we'll go through that initialization process, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what that initialization process does for you. So now let's go back and we'll click Initialize Common Features. And again, this is a series of questions that asks you very common tasks just to help you get started. Do you want to collapse the noun number feature, the noun number values to singular and plural? For English, we'll say yes. Do you want to collapse the verb time values to past, present, and future? Yes. Do you want to add a feature to clauses called adverbial clause type? Yes. I'll show you what this does in a minute. Do you want to add a feature to clauses called stative clause type? We have roughly 25 different stative clause types in TBTA, and it's very useful to have a feature on the clauses indicating what type it is. So we'll say yes. Do you want to add a feature to clauses called voice? In English we have active and passive, so we'll say yes. Do you want to add a feature to clauses called adverbial clause position? Generally, adverbial clauses are either preposed or postposed, and this will create a feature for us, and later our rules can use this feature, so we'll say yes. Do you want to add a feature to noun phrases called grammatical relation? Subject, object, indirect object, and oblique. We'll say yes. Do you want to add a rule that marks the relativized noun phrase in relative clauses? Yes, it's very convenient to write grammar rules when you know NP-rel, so we'll say yes. Do you want to add a rule that changes verbs with negative moods to affirmative moods and negative polarities? Okay, what this is saying is, okay, we have various moods in our semantic analysis system, and some are positive, like John should read that book, and others are negative, like John shouldn't read that book. In some languages, shouldn't is different than should and not. So in our analysis system, we keep them separate. In English, shouldn't is the same as should and negative polarity. So in English, it's good to say yes for this. I'll show you the rule that this copies in a minute. Do you want to add a rule that marks first-person nouns and second-person nouns as personal pronoun? We'll say yes. And here are some grammar options. Again, these are very simple questions that just help you get started. Coordinate noun phrases are separated by commas. In English, we would say John, Mary, and Bill went to the library. So John, comma, Mary, comma, and Bill went to the library. We want commas in there. Questions are marked with a question mark. There are no question marks in the semantic representations. Instead, the propositions are marked with the nillocutionary force, and two of the values are content interrogative and just no interrogative. But in English, we mark our questions with question marks. We'll say yes. Subjects of imperatives are marked as big pro. Big pro is a linguistic term meaning syntactically active but phonetically null. In other words, no surface content. In English, for an imperative, we say, read that book. We don't say you read that book. We just say read that book. So there is a subject, an agent there, but there's no surface content. It's realized with big pro, so we'll say yes. Descriptive relative clauses begin and end with commas, yes. Quotation marks are used for direct quotes, yes. So, now there are some default values. Enter the opening quotation mark. We provide a default value. You can change it to whatever you want in your language. For English, this is fine. A default closing quotation mark. Opening single quotation mark. Closing single quotation mark. The selected features have been initialized. Now let's go and look at what that process did for us. So now when we come here, when we look at the feature adjustment rules, the now numbers collapse to singular, plural, and puckle. So dual, trial, and quadrille have all been collapsed to plural. If we go to verb time, all of the past tense values have been collapsed to past, and the future tense values have been collapsed to future, and timeless is collapsed with the present. You can do this yourself. You can do this yourself later manually if you want, but those questions just help you get started. If we say add new future values, those questions that we were just asked a minute ago, they added features to clauses, adverbial clause types, dative clause type, voice, etc. If we look down here at our feature set, dialog, now, remember a few minutes ago, these were spares, but now we have a feature called adverbial clause type, and these are the values that we provide. For example, if sense A is called a conditional adverbial clause. And now that feature is here on all clauses. And if we look here, adverbial clause type equals not an adverbial clause. This is a very simple sentence saying a person walked. So it's not an adverbial clause. And if we look at stative clause type, it's not stative, it's an event. If we look here, stative clause type, now we have all of these values, like I mentioned. We have an equative sense and predicative sense, existential sense, locative sense, benefactive sense, etc. So now there's a feature on all propositions saying the stative clause type. And this particular sentence, a person walked, this is an event. So it's tagged as non-stative. Voice, active and passive. And we see that this one, the voice, is set to active. One more, adverbial clause position. So there are two values that we've added for you, preposed and postposed. Now right now this is just a feature with two values. Later we'll write a rule that actually says if it's a conditional adverbial clause, then tag it as preposed. And then our phrase structure rule will put all of the preposed adverbial clauses at the beginning of the sentence, and all of the postposed adverbial clauses will be positioned appropriately at the end by the phrase structure rule for clauses. A few more things those questions did for us just a minute ago. It asked if we use question marks. So now this rule will insert a question mark into all content interrogatives and just no interrogatives. If we look up here, now there have been rules copied from the library because of those questions that we just answered. For example, agents of imperatives realized with Big Pro. So now when there's an imperative, the agent noun phrase has a noun, and the surface realization is Big Pro. Later we'll write a rule that says when the noun's surface realization value is Big Pro, then the noun should be deleted. So those questions got us off to a good start. They copied some rules from the library, they collapsed some feature values, they added new features to our analysis system, and they got us off to a good start.